Captain Sarah Martinez gripped the control stick of her A-10 Warthog as she flew low over the rugged mountains of Afghanistan. The morning sun painted the rocky peaks in shades of gold and orange, but Sarah's mind was focused on the mission ahead. Intelligence reports had indicated enemy movement in the valley below, and her job was to provide close air support for the ground troops who might need her help. Sarah had been flying A-10s for 3 years now. The aircraft, nicknamed the Warthog because of its unusual appearance, was built around a massive 30mm cannon that could destroy tanks and enemy positions with devastating effect. It wasn't the prettiest plane in the Air Force, but it was tough as nails and could take a beating while still bringing its pilot home safely. The radio crackled in her helmet. "Thunder 1, this is Overwatch. We have friendly forces moving through Grid 4-7. Keep your eyes open for any suspicious activity in that sector." Sarah acknowledged the call and banked her aircraft toward the designated coordinates. Below her, the landscape looked peaceful enough, but she knew that appearances could be deceiving in this part of the world. As she approached the target area, Sarah could see a small convoy of American vehicles making their way along a narrow mountain road. The convoy consisted of 3 Humvees and a supply truck, moving slowly through the winding path that snaked between steep cliffs on both sides. It was exactly the kind of vulnerable position where enemy fighters like to set up ambushes. Sarah circled high above the convoy, using her aircraft's advanced targeting systems to scan the surrounding ridgelines for any signs of hostile activity. The A-10's sensors could detect heat signatures and movement that would be invisible to the naked eye, making it an excellent platform for this type of reconnaissance mission. Suddenly, her threat warning system began beeping urgently. Someone was painting her aircraft with a targeting radar, which meant enemy forces were preparing to engage. Sarah immediately began evasive maneuvers, pulling her aircraft into a sharp turn while deploying countermeasures to confuse any incoming missiles. The first surface-to-air missile streaked up from a hidden position in the rocks below. Sarah saw the white smoke trail racing toward her and threw her aircraft into an even steeper dive, hoping to break the missile's lock. The Warthog responded sluggishly compared to faster fighter jets, but its heavy armor plating gave her confidence that she could survive a hit if necessary. The missile exploded close enough to her aircraft that she could feel the shock wave through the cockpit. Warning lights began flashing on her instrument panel, indicating damage to her left engine and hydraulic systems. Sarah fought to maintain control as the aircraft began pulling to one side, the damaged engine producing uneven thrust. Despite the damage, Sarah knew her mission wasn't finished. The convoy below was still vulnerable, and she could see muzzle flashes from enemy positions in the rocks above the road. The ground troops were under attack, and she was their only immediate source of air support. Sarah lined up her damaged aircraft for an attack run, ignoring the protests from her wounded Warthog. The A-10's cannon roared to life, sending a stream of 30mm rounds into the enemy positions. The depleted uranium shells tore through rock and metal with devastating effect, silencing several of the hostile fighters. But the enemy wasn't finished with her yet. As Sarah pulled up from her attack run, another missile launch was detected by her sensors. This one was coming from a different direction, suggesting that she was facing a coordinated attack from multiple positions. The enemy had clearly been waiting for an American aircraft to respond to the ambush on the convoy. Sarah tried to maneuver away from the incoming missile, but her damaged aircraft wasn't responding properly to her control inputs. The hydraulic system failure was making it increasingly difficult to maintain stable flight, and she could smell smoke beginning to fill the cockpit. The second missile detonated even closer than the first, and this time the damage was catastrophic. Her right engine caught fire, and the aircraft's electrical systems began failing one by one. Sarah found herself fighting a losing battle against an airplane that was literally falling apart around her. The flight controls became increasingly unresponsive, and she realized that she was going to have to make a decision very soon about whether to attempt an emergency landing or eject from the aircraft. The ground was rushing up toward her as the A-10 entered an uncontrolled descent. Sarah tried everything she could think of to regain control, but the aircraft was too badly damaged. She could see that she was heading toward a rocky plateau that might offer her best chance of survival if she could somehow manage a crash landing. With her altitude dropping rapidly and her options running out, Sarah made the difficult decision to stay with her aircraft and attempt an emergency landing rather than ejecting. She knew that ejecting over enemy territory would put her at extreme risk of capture, and she also hoped that keeping the A-10 intact might give her access to its survival equipment and radios. The crash landing was violent and terrifying. The A-10 hit the rocky ground with tremendous force, bouncing and sliding across the rough terrain before finally coming to rest against a large boulder. Sarah was thrown forward against her restraints, and for a moment, everything went black. When she regained consciousness, Sarah found herself hanging upside down in her cockpit. The aircraft had flipped during the crash, and she was suspended by her ejection seat straps. Her head was pounding, and she could taste blood in her mouth, but she appeared to be alive and conscious. The immediate priority was getting out of the aircraft before it caught fire or exploded. Sarah managed to release her restraints and dropped onto what had been the cockpit ceiling. She could hear the metal of the aircraft creaking and settling as it cooled from the crash. Moving carefully to avoid cutting herself on the broken glass and twisted metal, she made her way toward the cockpit opening. The canopy had been damaged in the crash, but there was enough of an opening for her to crawl through. Sarah emerged from the wreckage to find herself on a desolate mountain plateau surrounded by rocky peaks. The nearest cover was a cluster of large boulders about 50 yards away from the crash site. Sarah quickly gathered what survival equipment she could from the aircraft, including her emergency radio, survival kit, and sidearm. She knew that the enemy forces who had shot her down would probably come looking for her, and she needed to put distance between herself and the crash site as quickly as possible. As she made her way toward the rocks, Sarah activated her emergency beacon and began transmitting on the rescue frequency. She identified herself using her call sign Thunder 1 and provided her coordinates, hoping that friendly forces would be able to locate her before the enemy did. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She was alone in hostile territory, possibly injured, with limited supplies and no immediate prospect of rescue. The enemy knew approximately where she had crashed, and they would certainly be organizing search parties to find her. Sarah found a defensible position among the rocks and settled in to wait, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether she lived or died. High above the Afghan mountains, Major Jake Thompson was leading a flight of 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons on a routine patrol mission. The sleek jets cut through the thin mountain air at 25,000 feet, their pilots scanning the terrain below for any signs of enemy activity. Jake had been flying F-16s for 8 years and had completed 2 previous deployments to Afghanistan, but today felt different somehow. The radio in Jake's helmet suddenly came alive with urgent chatter. All aircraft, this is rescue control. We have a pilot down in grid 47. A-10 aircraft Thunder 1 has crashed after taking enemy fire. Pilot is alive and transmitting on emergency frequency. Jake's blood ran cold at the announcement. A fellow pilot was down in enemy territory and time was running out. He immediately contacted his wingman, Captain Lisa Chen, who was flying the 2nd F-16 in their formation. Wolf 2, did you copy that emergency call? Roger that, Wolf 1. Thunder 1 is down and needs immediate assistance, came Lisa's reply. Both pilots knew the protocols for combat search and rescue operations. Their primary mission now was to establish contact with the downed pilot and provide air cover until rescue forces could arrive. Jake turned his aircraft toward the coordinates that had been broadcast over the radio. The area where Thunder 1 had gone down was known to be crawling with enemy fighters, and any rescue attempt would be extremely dangerous. The rocky terrain also made it difficult for helicopters to land, which would complicate the extraction process. As they approached the crash site, Jake began scanning the radio frequencies, trying to establish contact with the downed pilot. Static filled his headphones until suddenly a clear, determined voice broke through the interference. Any aircraft. Any aircraft. This is Thunder 1. I am alive and in defensive position approximately 200 meters northeast of my aircraft. Enemy forces are moving toward my location. Jake's heart raced as he heard the transmission. The pilot was alive, but clearly in immediate danger. Thunder 1, this is Wolf 1. We are F-16s inbound to your position. Can you identify yourself with your call sign and authentication code? The response came back immediately. Wolf 1, this is Captain Sarah Martinez. Call sign Thunder 1. Authentication code is Bravo 7 Charlie. Jake quickly checked the code against his mission briefing materials. Everything matched perfectly, confirming that this was indeed the pilot they were looking for. But then something unexpected happened. Jake's wingman, Lisa, came over the radio with excitement in her voice. Wolf 1, did she say Martinez? Sarah Martinez from the Academy? Jake was puzzled by Lisa's reaction. This wasn't the time for casual conversation with enemy forces potentially closing in on the downed pilot. Wolf 2, maintain radio discipline. We can discuss personal matters later. But Lisa pressed on, her voice filled with recognition. Jake, Sarah Martinez was my roommate at the Air Force Academy. We graduated together 5 years ago. She's one of the best pilots I know, and if anyone can survive this situation, it's her. The revelation hit Jake like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just any downed pilot they were trying to rescue. This was someone Lisa knew personally. Someone she had trained with and lived with during their years at the academy. Suddenly, the mission had taken on a much more personal dimension. Jake made a decision that would change the entire character of the rescue operation. Instead of simply providing air cover and waiting for the rescue helicopters, he decided that they needed to take a more active role in protecting Sarah until help arrived. Thunder 1, this is Wolf 1. My wingman knows you from the academy. We're not going anywhere until we get you home safely. Jake's voice carried a determination that Sarah could hear clearly over the radio. Wolf 1, is that Lisa Chen with you? Sarah's voice came back with a mixture of relief and amazement. Even in her desperate situation, she recognized the significance of having a trusted friend overhead. That's affirmative, Thunder 1. Wolf 2 is Lisa Chen, and she wants you to know that she's got your back just like old times. Jake could see Lisa's F-16 maneuvering closer to his aircraft, both pilots now completely focused on protecting their fellow aviator. The situation on the ground was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah reported that she could see enemy fighters moving through the rocks toward her position, and she estimated that they would reach her hiding place within the next 30 minutes. The rescue helicopters were still at least an hour away, which meant that Jake and Lisa would need to buy Sarah precious time. Jake began planning an attack on the enemy forces that were approaching Sarah's position. The F-16s carried air-to-ground missiles and bombs that could devastate enemy positions, but the rocky terrain made it difficult to distinguish between friendly and hostile forces. Any mistake could be fatal for Sarah. Thunder 1, we need you to mark your position so we can engage the enemy forces without risk to you, Jake transmitted. Sarah responded that she had smoke grenades and could mark her location, but she would need to expose herself briefly to deploy them. Negative, Thunder 1, too risky. We'll find another way, Lisa broke in over the radio. Her personal connection to Sarah was making her especially cautious about any plan that might put her friend in additional danger. Jake had an idea. The F-16s could perform low-level passes over the area, using their cannon to suppress the enemy forces without relying on larger weapons that might endanger Sarah. It would be dangerous for the F-16 pilots, as they would have to fly low enough to be vulnerable to small arms fire, but it might be their best option. Thunder 1, we're going to make some noise and keep the bad guys busy. Stay low and stay hidden. Jake rolled his F-16 into a steep dive toward the mountainside where Sarah's aircraft had crashed. The rocky terrain rushed up toward him as he lined up his targeting system on the enemy positions that Sarah had reported. The F-16's cannon erupted with a thunderous roar as Jake strafed the mountainside. The 20-millimeter rounds chewed up rock and dirt, creating clouds of dust and debris that would hopefully force the enemy fighters to take cover. Lisa followed immediately behind him, adding her own firepower to the suppression mission. The effect was dramatic and immediate. Sarah reported that the enemy advance had stopped, and she could see fighters scrambling for cover among the rocks. The F-16s had bought her valuable time, but Jake knew that they couldn't keep this up indefinitely. The jets were burning fuel rapidly at low altitude, and they would eventually need to climb back up to more efficient cruising levels. More importantly, the enemy forces were probably calling for reinforcements and anti-aircraft weapons. If shoulder-fired missiles or mobile surface-to-air systems arrived in the area, the F-16s would become extremely vulnerable during their low-level attacks. Jake made another critical decision. He contacted Rescue Control and requested that all available air assets be diverted to support the rescue operation. Within minutes, additional F-16s, A-10s, and even a B-1 bomber were heading toward their location. The entire mission had shifted from a routine patrol to a major combat search and rescue operation. Thunder 1, the cavalry is coming. Just hold tight a little longer, Jake transmitted to Sarah. He could hear the relief in her voice as she acknowledged the message, but he also knew that the most dangerous part of the rescue was still ahead. The enemy forces had regrouped and were beginning to advance again, this time using a different approach route that took advantage of the rocky terrain for cover. Sarah reported that she could hear voices getting closer to her position, and she was preparing to defend herself if necessary. Jake and Lisa continued their strafing runs, but they were running low on ammunition and fuel. The additional aircraft that had been dispatched would not arrive for another 20 minutes, leaving a critical gap in air cover just when Sarah needed it most. It was then that Lisa made a decision that surprised everyone, including Jake. Wolf 1, I'm going to try something. Stay high and keep watch for surface-to-air missiles. Before Jake could ask what she had in mind, Lisa's F-16 suddenly dropped to an extremely low altitude and began flying a racetrack pattern directly over Sarah's position. She wasn't firing her weapons, but the psychological effect on the enemy forces was immediate and powerful. The sound of a jet fighter at low altitude is absolutely terrifying to anyone on the ground, especially when that aircraft is clearly prepared to attack at any moment. Lisa's aggressive flying forced the enemy fighters to remain in cover, effectively pinning them down until the rescue helicopters could arrive. But Lisa's tactics came at great personal risk. Flying at such low altitude in mountainous terrain required incredible skill and concentration, and she was burning fuel at an unsustainable rate. Jake watched nervously from above, ready to provide support if his wingman got into trouble. The radio crackled with a new transmission from Rescue Control. All aircraft, rescue helicopters are 10 minutes out. Maintain air cover and prepare for extraction of Thunder 1. The end of Sarah's ordeal was finally in sight, but those final 10 minutes would prove to be the longest and most dangerous of the entire mission. The sound of helicopter rotors echoed through the mountain valleys as two HH-60 Pave Hawks approached Sarah's location. The rescue helicopters, heavily armed and escorted by additional Apache gunships, represented the culmination of a massive military effort to bring one pilot home safely. But the most dangerous part of the mission was just beginning. Sarah crouched behind the rocks, listening to the approaching aircraft while keeping watch for enemy movement. Her emergency radio had been her lifeline for the past 2 hours, maintaining contact with Jake and Lisa as they circled overhead. The F-16 pilots had become her guardian angels, repeatedly driving back enemy forces who tried to approach her position. Thunder 1, this is Rescue 1. We have you visual and are preparing to land. Pop smoke to mark your exact location, came the voice of the lead helicopter pilot over the radio. Sarah reached for one of her smoke grenades, knowing that this simple action would expose her position to any enemy fighters who might be watching. The purple smoke billowed up from Sarah's position, clearly marking her location for the rescue team. But it also revealed her hiding place to hostile forces who had been searching for her throughout the morning. Almost immediately, Sarah heard shouting in a foreign language from somewhere nearby, indicating that enemy fighters had spotted the smoke signal. Jake and Lisa, still circling overhead in their F-16s, saw the enemy movement immediately. Rescue 1, be advised you have hostiles moving toward the landing zone from multiple directions, Jake transmitted urgently. The rescue was turning into a race against time, with enemy forces converging on Sarah's position just as help was finally arriving. The lead Pavehawk pilot was a veteran of dozens of combat rescues, and he didn't hesitate. Roger that, Wolf 1. We're going in hot. The helicopter descended rapidly toward the rocky plateau where Sarah was hiding, its door gunners scanning for targets while the co-pilot coordinated with the F-16s overhead. Sarah could see the helicopter approaching, its rotors creating a whirlwind of dust and debris as it settled onto the rocky ground. The crew chief was already leaning out of the aircraft, motioning for her to run toward the helicopter while his fellow crew members provided covering fire with their machine guns. But the enemy had other plans. As Sarah broke from cover and began sprinting toward the waiting helicopter, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions in the surrounding rocks. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet as she ran, and she could hear the distinctive crack of rounds passing close to her head. The rescue team responded instantly. The door gunners on the Pavehawk opened fire with their heavy machine guns, sending streams of bullets toward the enemy positions. The Apache gunships that had been circling at a distance suddenly swooped down, adding their own devastating firepower to the fight. Jake and Lisa, watching the drama unfold from above, made split-second decisions that would later be studied in military academies around the world. Instead of maintaining their safe altitude, both F-16 pilots dove toward the mountainside, using their aircraft as shields between Sarah and the enemy gunfire. Lisa's F-16 screamed past just feet above the ground, so close to the enemy positions that the jet wash from her engines knocked several fighters off balance. Jake followed immediately behind her, his cannon blazing as he strafed the rocks where muzzle flashes had revealed hostile positions. The coordinated attack created enough confusion and suppression to give Sarah the precious seconds she needed. She reached the helicopter and dove through the open door, landing hard on the metal floor as the crew chief grabbed her and pulled her further into the aircraft. "Go! Go! Go!" shouted the crew chief, and the Pavehawk immediately lifted off, its engines straining to climb away from the dangerous landing zone. But their troubles were far from over. As the helicopter gained altitude, shoulder-fired missiles began streaking up from the mountainside below. The pilot threw the Pavehawk into a series of evasive maneuvers that would have been impressive in a fighter jet, let alone a heavy helicopter loaded with rescue equipment. Flares and chaff bloomed behind the aircraft as its defensive systems worked to confuse the incoming missiles. Jake and Lisa continued their attacks on the enemy positions, determined to eliminate the missile threat before it could bring down the rescue helicopter. Their F-16s danced through the mountain valleys, using the terrain to mask their approaches while delivering precision strikes on hostile forces. Sarah, strapped into a seat inside the Pavehawk, watched through the small windows as the landscape rushed past below. She could see her crashed A-10 growing smaller in the distance, and she realized that she was actually going to survive this ordeal. The professional competence and personal dedication of her fellow pilots had made the difference between life and death. The helicopter climbed steadily toward safer altitudes, escorted by Jake and Lisa in their F-16s. The immediate danger was over, but Sarah's rescue had required the coordinated efforts of dozens of aircraft and hundreds of military personnel. The mission demonstrated the lengths to which the American military would go to bring home one of its own. As they flew toward the forward operating base, where Sarah would receive medical attention, she reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to her rescue. The recognition of her call sign by Lisa Chen had transformed a routine combat search and rescue into something much more personal and urgent. Jake's voice came over the radio one final time as they approached the base. "Thunder 1, this is Wolf 1. Welcome back to the land of the living." Sarah could hear the relief and satisfaction in his voice, knowing that he had played a crucial role in bringing her home safely. "Wolf 1, this is Thunder 1. I owe you and Wolf 2 more than I can ever repay," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "The bonds forged in combat between military pilots are unlike any other relationship, built on mutual respect and the shared understanding that they would risk everything for each other." Lisa's F-16 pulled alongside the helicopter for a moment, close enough that Sarah could see her former roommate in the cockpit. The two pilots exchanged a thumbs-up gesture that spoke volumes about their friendship and shared experiences. They had trained together at the academy, and now they had proven that those bonds would hold strong even in the most dangerous circumstances. The Pavehawk touched down at the forward operating base, where medical personnel were waiting to evaluate Sarah's condition. As she climbed out of the helicopter, Sarah looked up to see Jake and Lisa's F-16s climbing away into the afternoon sky, their mission complete. Later, after Sarah had been cleared by the medical team and debriefed by intelligence officers, she would learn the full scope of the rescue operation that had been mounted on her behalf. More than 20 aircraft had been involved, including fighters, bombers, helicopters, and support planes. The cost in fuel, ammunition, and flight hours was enormous, but nobody questioned the decision to commit those resources. In the military culture of the United States Air Force, no pilot is left behind, regardless of rank, gender, or any other consideration. Sarah's rescue had demonstrated that principle in action, and it had also shown how personal relationships could transform a professional duty into something approaching heroism. Jake Thompson and Lisa Chen were both awarded Distinguished Flying Crosses for their actions during the rescue mission. Their willingness to risk their own lives to save a fellow pilot exemplified the highest traditions of military aviation. Jake's leadership in coordinating the rescue and Lisa's recognition of Sarah's call sign had made the difference between a successful mission and a potential tragedy. Sarah herself returned to flying A-10s after a brief recovery period, but she carried with her a profound appreciation for the dedication and skill of her fellow aviators. Her crash and rescue had lasted only a few hours, but the experience had reinforced her belief in the strength of the bonds that unite military pilots. The story of Sarah's rescue spread throughout the Air Force, becoming part of the informal oral tradition that passes down lessons and inspiration from one generation of pilots to the next. Young aviators would hear about the mission and understand that their commitment to each other extended far beyond professional obligations. Years later, when Jake, Lisa, and Sarah had all completed their military careers and moved on to civilian life, they would remain close friends. They would gather annually to commemorate the anniversary of the rescue mission, sharing memories and reflecting on how a chance recognition of a call sign had changed all of their lives. The mountains of Afghanistan would see many more rescue missions in the years that followed, but few would demonstrate so clearly the power of personal connections and professional excellence working together. Sarah's rescue had become a model for how the military takes care of its own, regardless of the cost or risk involved. In the end, the story of Thunder 1's rescue was really a story about the human connections that give meaning to military service. Technical skill and advanced equipment had played crucial roles, but it was the personal recognition between Lisa and Sarah that had transformed a dangerous rescue into an almost sacred mission to bring a friend home safely.